To Geek Soup. Man, it has been kind of crazy, like, getting these, like, last 3 episodes together because I was really behind schedule because, you know, like, real life kind of has this funny way of, like, making things happen that you didn't expect and it throws all your plans out of whack. So, you know what, hang on. There's, like, a really loud, like, background there. Okay, now it's gone.
It was our subway. That's like a block away.
Oh,
I'll move to the other room. That is New York.
No, you're fine. It'll be fine now that I know what it is. So
it's occasional.
Marilette Sanchez is with us, and she lives in New York, so we get to contend with the subway. And I was just saying that it kind of tends to be the case, Marilette, that when we're talking here on the podcast, like it's gonna be kind of like heavy discussion and a little bit more into the serious than we typically tend to go here. But that's good because sometimes we need to talk about more serious stuff. And today, what's going to be framing our discussion of some serious things is Black Panther. And, you know, we previously have talked about Wonder Woman. And when we talked, I didn't really get into all of my, like, issues that I have with Wonder Woman as a movie, because that's not really what we were talking about. And you can feel free to disagree with me on this, but I sort of felt that Wonder Woman as a movie was overrated.
I can see that.
And that it was overrated, like, on purpose and for political reasons. Like, it's important that everybody really, really like this movie because it's the first female-led superhero movie. And
yeah, I can't disagree. And first one directed by a woman. So there's just a ton of things that you could get into.
Well, and it's not actually the first superhero movie directed by a woman. No, Thor 2 was directed by Patty Jenkins.
Oh, I did not know that.
And so there have been other female directors in the MCU. And so since that was the case, you know, at least in my opinion about Wonder Woman, I was sort of also concerned going into Black Panther a little bit. And I was a little bit worried that we were going to have the same, you know, sort of politically driven push to, you know, really, really love this movie because it's like the black superhero movie. And I was very, very glad to walk out of that movie really feeling that it deserves all of the praise that it's gotten. It's a great movie just on its own terms, and the political things that it has to say, I think, are held in an admirable balance. You know, you have the main antagonist, you know, taking this really hard sort of anti-colonialist stance, and the implications of that for him are very, very radical, and, you know, not what most, you know, people would even countenance. But at the same time, there is some truth in the things that he's saying, even though his own, like, bitterness and anger have skewed those truths into a form that compels him to take action that is beyond the pale.
Yeah, he was a great villain. I don't think I've loved a villain that much in a while. Like, where you're not exactly rooting for him, but you understand him, and yeah, that doesn't always happen in a villain. So he's great.
Absolutely, and especially in many of the Marvel films, we kind of tend to have what I've started calling MCU villainitis, where it's just kind of, you know, a one or two dimensional character that just sort of has a grudge because of things, and you don't really get to see a lot of who they are as a character. And it's really unfortunate because we've seen these kinds of characters portrayed by very, very gifted actors. You've got a guy like Mads Mikkelsen, who played Caecilius in Doctor Strange, who is like really well known for his excellent acting. He was just acclaimed in Hannibal. He was pretty good in Rogue One as well, and all kinds of other things. He's in foreign cinema also. Kate Blanchett, I think, was not used particularly well as Hela. No. She was just again this kind of like really powerful badass with a grudge, and that's sort of all there is to her character, in my opinion. I know some of my other co-hosts think that she deserves a little bit more credit than I tend to give her. Christopher Eccleston in Thor 2, also a really great actor, also a really forgettable villain. And and it just kind of goes on and on. It's an exception when we get a villain that is actually a good villain and a good character and an interesting character just on their own terms. So before we get too much further into this, want to talk a little bit about Black Panther in the comics. And oh shoot, I'm gonna have to edit some of this because I actually didn't I didn't really look up all of the stuff on that and do all of that review that I wanted to. But I can just sort of wing something basic because there's a lot. Okay. And Black Panther has been around in the comics for a long, long time. But I feel like even though he's had some really interesting stories, they've all sort of happened off in the periphery of things. Oh, there's a subway again.
It's actually above ground right now, so it's...
They've happened off in the periphery, and it hasn't really affected the rest of the Marvel Comics universe enough to where he, his stories would, just have a lot of bearing on the rest of what's going on. He's been an Avenger for a long time, and a lot of what we have on the screen really mirrors closely a lot of the story arcs that have happened in the Black Panther comics. You have had these, different pretenders to the throne that have threatened his rule and have threatened Wakanda with their own, selfish or reckless or wrong-headed, ideas about how things should go. M'Baku was one of those. And Klaw is a guy who has been around in the comics for just as long as Black Panther. He's a little bit more out there in the comics portrayal. He did start out, losing a hand while stealing vibranium from Wakanda, and it was sort of replaced with a sonic weapon, like you see in the movie. But eventually he comes to be transformed into like a creature of living sound.
Interesting.
And that's, wacky and out there and comic book crazy. But after the Civil War event in the comics, the Fantastic Four went through a little bit of a shakeup. Because Mr. Fantastic and Invisible Woman were actually on opposite sides of the Civil War question in the comics. And so after that all sort of resolved, they went off to kind of try and get their marriage back together. And Black Panther and Storm came and replaced them in the Fantastic Four for a while. So that's something interesting that's happened with Black Panther in the comics. But with the movie itself, there's there's just a ton to talk about here. One of the things that really got me, I can't remember if we have talked about. Oh, yes, we have, because you wrote an article about this case.
I did.
And and we'll link to that in the show notes too, because that's also a very good article. And just by the way, we could mention this because it's kind of fun. Tell us. So you've been doing your own blog, but recently you have had another sort of platform for your writing. Can you tell me just a little bit about that?
Yeah. I don't think I'm an expert. I just started contributing, but Think Christian. It's I guess I would call it like an online magazine kind of feel, but they write a lot about pop culture. Mm-hmm. And they have tons of contributors. And just after the Wonder Woman article that I wrote, one of the contributors came across it and kind of invited me in. And later on, I pitched an article about Taylor Swift, so they took that article. So that was pretty exciting. So right around the time that Taylor Swift, well, it was that weekend. I had to write in a weekend, which was crazy. But when she released that album, Reputation, that was just exhausting release. She took forever. But yeah, so I wrote a review on her, and then they gave me another chance to write about This Is Us, which I love. So I wrote about Jack's character, and especially as a husband and a father, and how it's just not, you don't get that picture of being a husband and a father being painted in a good light in Hollywood normally, so I just kind of highlighted that. Right. So yeah, thinkchristian.net is the link, and yeah, they cover a lot of good things, music, movies, so I'm really grateful to be a part of that community.
Yeah, they do have lots of really great and thoughtful articles, and I've enjoyed reading those. I think I've even posted a couple of them to the Two Geek Soup Facebook page. But what I have here in my notes is, why did you do it, Kevin? No, it's not Kevin. Okay. It's Randall.
Oh,
Randall. Why did you do it, Randall?
That's funny. You're right.
the other guy from This Is Us is a character in Black Panther, and so and so let's camp out here on the story element of Eric having been left there after T'Chaka killed his father.
His brother?
Oh,
his
don't...
Father. Gotcha. Eric's father.
Yeah, Eric's father. Yeah. I don't get it.
Okay.
There literally doesn't seem to be any compelling, story reason for him to have been left behind. Unless it was just in order to shield the family from scandal that, one of the royal family had betrayed Wakanda and had, facilitated Klaw's theft of the vibranium. I guess maybe that could be a reason, but that's not something that they mention at all. Whenever, there is a question about why this happened, sort of the answer is just because. When T'Challa confronts T'Chaka on the ancestral plane and asks him, why did you leave the child behind? He literally just says something like, this is the version of the truth that I chose to tell. Or this is the truth that I chose to omit.
Yeah.
And that's not even a reason.
It's just states what he did, not why he did it.
Yeah. And so that was a part of the story that was really unsatisfying to me, because I feel like, usually these things are much more tightly written, and we get a better, insight into what these characters are thinking and their motivations for stuff. And, that's something that Marvel, even in the comics, has been better at than DC. And that's why, the characters of Marvel are so much more relatable, because we actually
they're human.
Get into their heads a lot more.